Hi, I'm Beth Yohe. I'm the Executive Director of the Conflict Center in Denver, Colorado, and also a board member for the International Bullying Prevention Association. I want to talk about how we create culture intentionally. So we know that school culture, like any other organization, is created, and we either do it intentionally or unintentionally. One example of how unintentional culture can be created is a simple example from one of the organizations I worked at. When I first started, there was an office manager who always took the mail down at 3 o'clock. And everybody knew that if they wanted their mail to go out that day, it had to go at 3 o'clock. Now, the post office didn't actually pick up the mail until 5, but it was a culture in the office, the mail went down at 3. And so this went on for many years, and finally someone asked the question, well, why does the mail go down at 3? Well, it turns out that the office manager took her cigarette break at 3 o'clock. And so she had created this culture in the office based on a personal need. And so even after she wasn't taking the mail and someone else was doing it, she had taught them to take it at 3. And no one had questioned it. So it was an example of unintentional culture that no one thought to ask until someone thought to ask, why are we doing it this way? And that happens in every organization and certainly in schools. And so when we think about creating positive culture for our students, we have to do it with intention and asking important questions. Some of the questions that are most important to ask with every decision is, who does this advantage and who does this disadvantage? From the schedules that we make, to what programs we offer, to how much something costs. We need to ask the question, who does this advantage and who does this disadvantage? In order to try to identify those places where we have unintended consequences or create culture unintentionally. One of the important pieces is we often hear don't sweat the small stuff, but in setting intentional culture in schools, we have to sweat the small stuff. It is about the small stuff that really creates the kind of culture that's inclusive and positive and makes students and staff feel like they're valued, seen, and included in the school. Some examples of how we sweat the small stuff and use these important questions, there's many of them, but I'll just offer a couple. One is around discipline. This is an important topic. We know that there's overrepresentation in terms of race, sexual orientation, and disability in terms of who's suspended and expelled and even just referred for disciplinary matters. We have to ask those questions and look at who's being disciplined, why, for what reasons, and are there ways that we can do this differently. Another example is simple things as schedules and calendars. When do we schedule programs? Are we paying attention to the religious observances of all of our students? If it's brought to our attention that we inadvertently scheduled something, let's say on the second night of Rosh Hashanah, what's our reaction? Do we make an effort to change it, or do we say, well, that's okay? Another example of scheduling is even just thinking about who's available and who will get to benefit. I worked with a school where the PTA came up with a great idea the first week of school to have an ice cream social, and they wanted to celebrate and have it be really welcoming for the students to kick off the new year. Unfortunately, they scheduled it after school, and so any student who took the bus or went to after-school programs didn't get to participate. So it wasn't done intentionally, but they didn't ask the question, who can be there? Who's advantaged by the time of day? So they switched it the next year to lunchtime, so all the students can participate. Another example is around gender and gender identity. Lots of elementary schools, there's a common practice of having students line up to go from class to class in rows based on gender. So there's a boy line or a girl line. And studies show that even something as simple as paying attention to gender in that way, naming boys and girls, saying good morning boys and girls, creates more tendency for the students to buy into stereotypes about gender and not to form friendships across gender. So it's in the small stuff, it's in each detail and thinking about identity, asking those questions. So in the example of the school lines, who does this advantage? Well, it's easy for teachers. I understand why teachers do it. It's quick, it's easy. Who does it disadvantage? It disadvantages our students, definitely students who don't identify in the binary of boy or girl, students that have a different gender identity or questioning what their gender identity is, but it also disadvantages the classroom in terms of forming relationships across gender. Another piece of creating culture intentionally is making sure that we're doing it with young people and not for young people. So in all these decisions and in these questions that we're asking, we have to include youth, from elementary to high school. Now, we can use climate surveys, we can use focus groups, we can have students as part of a culture and climate committee. But if we're not asking them those questions and if we're not having them invested in creating culture, no matter how many efforts we do as adults, they won't be successful because students really are drivers of the culture in our school. And finally, we have to be continually engaged in the process. As a school, pick a couple of these areas, different identity groups that you feel like may not be included, asking the questions of who's showing up to things, what additional information do we need to know to make sure everyone's feeling included in our school, and then continuing to reassess. So just like laundry that we have at home, it's a constant cycle. We always have more to do. We need to keep asking those questions. So that school that switched the ice cream social to the school day, a couple years go by, you have different PTA members. They're like, oh, it's too stressful during the school day. Let's do it after school again. And so we have to have that conversation again about but who's included and who's excluded when we make those decisions. To sum up, we create culture intentionally in schools by sweating the small stuff and asking the question, who does this advantage and who does this disadvantage with every decision that we make?